My name is Denise Hancock, and I am the organizer and I guess host of the New Orleans Astrology Meetup group. And I want to welcome you here this afternoon. This is normally a pretty informal conversation, but this afternoon we have a special guest, Daniel Beck of Inner Makeup Astrology, has agreed to sort of kick us off with a presentation and lead a discussion about conceiving of astrology as divination. We are recording the presentation, but unless you speak up or show your face on screen, you won't be, in the recording. However, I mean, I think, Daniel will just use this for, whatever purposes on his website. Anyway, so if you consent to the recording, be sure and mark that. And Daniel, I'll let you get started. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Denise, and thank you for hosting this and, as I understand it, reinvigorating the New Orleans Astrology Meetup, which, as I understand, was a little bit dormant for a while. So yes, I'm Daniel Beck of Inner Makeup Astrology. I'm a practicing astrologer here in the Crescent City. To learn more, go over to innermakeup.net. That's my website. Lots going on over there, podcasts, blog posts, and I do readings. If any of what I say resonates with you, feel free to get in touch for a reading. And, as Denise said, the title of the talk today is Conceiving of Astrology as Divination. And, feel free, I have the chat here, so if anybody wants to just put questions in the chat, and we'll be monitoring it. The chart of the moment actually is very fun and lively, so it's a lot of Mercury involved, to be quite frank. So if you want to put some questions in or have some comments, then I can weave them in as I'm speaking, and then we can carry on a further conversation. That's all well and good. So the title of the talk today, and I'm going to try to get through it somewhat efficiently, because I don't want to get bogged down too much in this. But the talk is Conceiving of Astrology as Divination. And, that might sound very simple or, whatever, divination, okay. But it actually, this concept has a very recent but really long history in astrology, recently in the past several decades, but really what does it mean to conceive of astrology as a form of divination really goes back hundreds of years. So it really is, what does it mean to really consider astrology a form of divination? And that's what we're getting into. So, okay. So astrology is divination, or esoteric mumbo jumbo. And I'm going to get into why I picked the term mumbo jumbo. But, it's fun. We're actually trying to have a little bit of fun with this. These can be pretty heavy topics, especially in the astrology community. But I encourage you to have a little bit of fun with this, and we will as we go along. But astrology is divination. And hello to those of you just coming on. We're just talking about astrology as divination. But astrology as divination, it gets back to the roots of ancient practices such as astral omens, or things that are much more sign-based. I don't necessarily mean zodiac signs. I mean literally having signs from, say, birds or a falling leaf, or just any kind of oracle, as opposed to what we now have in astrology are kind of objective charts, really at the stroke of a key at this point. An objective birth chart, an objective event chart, ephemerides, which is where we get the planetary placements, that things are very much systematized and objective. Astrology as divination actually says, well, hold on, actually, when we do something like the shuffle of the tarot deck and throw the cards, or the I Ching, actually astrology's like that. It's not always so objective. And it's in fact something to be, according to the philosophy of astrology as divination, something to be interpreted. And it's not so objective. It's really that the interpretation of a chart, as opposed to the chart being an objective entity unto itself. And therefore, it's participatory in nature. Astrology is divination. It relies upon us to actually engage in divination. So we can't just be objective observers of an astrology chart or transits or events happening absent ourselves. We're very much involved in astrology. And then in that sense, astrology is divination. It's much more uncontrollable, and it allows for mystery and revelation. Things like wrong charts. There are tons of stories, and both astrologers and even skeptics cite examples when wrong charts are used, but then miraculously you get some really good information from wrong charts. And there are chance occurrences or strange occurrences or meaningful coincidences, and even potential psi phenomena or paranormal stuff. And astrology's divination is not necessarily opposed to scientific inquiries, but it holds that the practice of astrology and the art of astrology as divination should be separated from the scientific inquiry of what we might call natural astrology or scientific astrology, if we're trying to really replicate and see objective things that can be observed regardless of our interaction with if we're divining. And perhaps the person who really has marshaled these arguments best in the past several decades is Jeffrey Cornelius, specifically his book, Moment of Astrology. So if you want to learn, I mean, this is a few minutes, but these conversations have been happening in the astrology community for decades, and then honestly over millennia. What is astrology, defining astrology. So check out his work, Moment of Astrology, if you're interested. Largely, the Company of Astrologers is an organization. So, if you're interested, that's one resource that you can look into to learn more about this. So again, astrology is more conceived of, it's a, clients tell me this, a divinatory art, or, something that is like going to get a tarot reading or I Ching, that it is much more based upon the moment, that it's not, and hello for those of you just joining, it's not so much that we can just leave the charts alone and then they're going like clockwork, all space, all time, and it's just a matter of us checking in, and it would have happened anyways. It really relies upon us to be involved. Okay. So some of you may remember Carl Jung. He was a very famous 20th century seminal figure. He founded what was called analytical psychology. He was a psychiatrist, very, very interesting person. He coined the term archetype, coined the term synchronicity. So he's very interesting because he can give us some insight into these conversations around astrology as divination and how we might think of astrology. And again, for reference, there's a wonderful astrologer in the UK. Her name's Maggie Hyde. She wrote a whole book called Jung and Astrology, and it's really great. And these are she put this together in her book. But again, this is getting into objectivity and then moving along to things that aren't necessarily so objective. So this is the famous quote from Jung: "Whatever is born or done in this moment of time has the quality of this moment in time." So that's Jung on something like the objectivity of a birth chart, whereby he's saying, if you're born at a certain moment, that's quite objective. You are your chart, transits are going to happen, it's pretty much like clockwork, that's it. But then the interesting thing is, as he moved along in life, he said, this is a notion I used formerly, but I have since replaced it with the idea of synchronicity. Since qualitative time is nothing but the flux of things. So qualitative time, remember the quality of the moment into which you're born. So again, you are the character of your moment. But then he's saying at this point, well, I don't know, things are kind of in flux. It's not always so objective. And he's rethinking what he had said formerly. And synchronicity really has to do with, probably if we're all on this call, we've experienced synchronicity where it's like, things are kind of out of the ordinary and something happens, but we're really in tune with some great things and very insightful things, like I don't know, a leaf falls on the ground and it's very meaningful, and then you think of your mother and it's meaningful. I mean, it's not a great example, but something like that. It's sort of out of the ordinary events, but you're in tune with what he called the acausal connecting principle. So there's some kind of order that's out of the normal order of events, but it's very meaningful. But then the last step he takes is he says synchronicity takes the coincidence of events in space and time as meaning something more than mere chance, namely a peculiar interdependence of objective events among themselves, as well as with the subjective state of the observer or observers. So this is really where we end up as far as astrology as divination, that we are very much important as far as astrology is concerned, that astrology is not just that qualitative moment of birth or a birth of a chart or one kind of objective moment in space and time, but that through our observation, we are critically involved, and that, you know, in a metaphysical sense, we're drawing ourselves to these moments in a very daimonic way. It gets into the daimon or spirit, that we bind ourselves to those moments psychically. So, you know, again, to just reiterate, objective moment, maybe not so objective, things are in flux, but then actually it's beyond just the moment itself. We're really involved with how we view it and our own awareness. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to change this. Ah, there it is. So this is, there's a gentleman, his name is Bruce Schofield, and he has spent a lot of time in what we now know as Mexico and Central America, studying Mesoamerican astrology. So this is kind of a hybrid of the moment of birth and divination. And what he writes is parents would learn about a child's fate, character, and profession, you know, according to the moment of birth. But in order to avoid a bad fate, parents would often have their children baptized on a better day, even if this meant waiting a few days to make the birth official. So this is interesting. So again, there's some kind of acceptance of an objective moment of birth, but then yet you can wiggle with it. I mean, you can really change fate, if you will, if you want to use terms like that. And you can really, through magical divinatory processes, actually bend that objectivity of the chart. So in part, I was, you know, it's great, you know, re-upping New Orleans Astrology Meetup. I mean, this is wonderful. So I was thinking about how I could contribute. And it was funny. This is a quote from a recent astrology journal. And it says, and this gets into what is science of astrology, what is divination, and that conversation. And from this journal, it says, while denying astrology is a science at all could be seen as a way of evading and placating some of the criticisms leveled against it by the scientific community, it can also be argued that those same critics would regard many of the alternative astrological philosophies as esoteric mumbo jumbo or nonsense. That's why at the beginning, I had done the mumbo jumbo, astrology is divination or esoteric mumbo jumbo. So, of course, there are skeptics of astrology, and that's a whole long conversation as well. But the interesting thing is, you know, when you get into astrology as divination, you might think, well, because it's divination, that's not really science, so skeptics or even astrologers might not like that. But the irony is, there's a story that the gentleman, Jeffrey Cornelius, who I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, tells, where he actually met the very famous skeptic Paul Kurtz, who, if you remember, he was one of the original founders of I believe founders of Humanist magazine, or if not founders, very heavily involved. And he did a lot of these skeptical inquiries into astrology. And Jeffrey Cornelius actually met him, and he said, now look, I know you've got a problem, he's British, with astrology, but what if I told you it was, you know, a poetic interpretation of the heavens? And Paul Kurtz, one of the most famous skeptics in the world, said, that's okay. And I have a good friend of mine, his name's Alex Boxer. He wrote a book called Scheme of Heaven, and he's actually skeptical of astrology, but he loves it. And he really challenges the scientific community to kind of chill out and give astrology its due. And, you know, he doesn't have any problem with the way that I do astrology. So sometimes these things that might be thought of as, oh, mumbo jumbo, whatever, actually have some real validity to them, even if it's, you know, thought of as not being valid at all. And this is just the mumbo jumbo roller coaster. I was just looking online, and these people set up this roller coaster in Britain because they felt that the way people were naming roller coasters anywhere is mumbo jumbo. It's like the rocket roller coaster and this kind of thing. And I think astrology as divination is kind of like a roller coaster. I mean, you get on, you don't know what's going to happen, and you kind of got to go along for that ride. It's a different kind of spirit than saying, you know what, I know that this transit is going to happen now. I know that this is going to happen, and it's like clockwork. Astrology as divination says, no, we're involved in these charts and the interpretation. And actually, to take it to the next step, that's actually a good thing, allowing for mystery and allowing oneself to come into knowing, as opposed to preordaining what we might know about astrology and charts in our lives. It's allowing for mystery so we can know more, and it's a very beautiful thing. So, okay, sorry. Okay, so I thought, well, you know what? If I'm going to think about mumbo jumbo, I better read the book Mumbo Jumbo. So this is, I don't know if you know him. He's in his 80s now, very famous writer, poet, extremely prolific, has written just tons and tons of stuff. He was a professor at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, I believe, for many years. A really incredible writer and just imaginative fiction, historical fiction. It's if you could even categorize it. But I was like, I better, so I was thinking mumbo jumbo, and I was thinking, well, let me read the book Mumbo Jumbo. So, and that's, this is what astrology as divination is. It's not that you just go willy-nilly, but you really let the mind run a little bit, and you have hopefully some kind of framework, like literature, like whatever your technique is to do it. So I was just thinking, okay, look at the cover of this book. It's it's Aquarius if you look at the top of that book. And then I was also reminded by the tarot card, the Three of Cups. So I was like, okay, let's just think about that a little bit and put it together. Aquarius, Three of Cups. So an Aquarian theme, Three of Cups. So I thought, the ideological freedom, I think I misspelled that, sorry, to celebrate divination. And that's really what Mumbo Jumbo is, a very complex text, but in one part, it is about music and spirit and the roots that go pre what our modern astrology is, pre-objectivity. So that's a picture of him. And it's funny, he was writing this poem about Pluto and Lucas. So it's, it's kind of funny, but this is a quote from two of the characters in his book, actually a mother or a father and daughter. And she says, why must you mix poetry with concrete events? This is a new day pop. We need scientists and engineers. We need lawyers. And he says, all that's all right, what you speak of, but that ain't all. I'll bet before this 20th century is out, men will turn once more to mystery. So, and then he does get into astrology in the book and different forms of divination, actually voodoo, all sorts of different stuff. Okay, so I have a comment from, okay, nice, didn't know that. It's a lot of stuff none of us knows. That's sort of the point. Psychology is considered a science, and funnily enough, right, so Greek word psyche, soul, breath, yes, right. So yeah, and it's interesting, I would say, as far as psychology, what can be tested with psychology, because especially the practice of psychology, you're talking about individual moments with patients. But when you're looking at large sample sets, or to put it analogously to astrology, when you're looking at huge sets of data, it's hard to extrapolate replicable scientific insights from that. So yeah, it's interesting what in the social sciences is scientific or rises to the level of, really hard science, or is it some combination of both? But that's, I think, in part, Ishmael Reed, through the characters, he seems to be saying, okay, we're not chucking out science. Of course, we're on a Zoom call right now. I mean, without science, we wouldn't be doing this. But at the same time, if everything is just replicable all the time, we lose spirit, we lose joy potentially that doesn't solely come from the materiality that science can give us. And then also ethics. This is another point. The ethics of science. If there is some kind of replicable astrology out there, we know with science when things can get into the wrong hands, or things getting into the wrong hands, there's an ethical question about it. And I think at its core, those of us who practice astrology as divination, we really believe in finding the line of good fortune, as some of my colleagues would say. That's really what it's about, and helping people make a turn for the better. So there's the ethics of predicting. What are we predicting? What are we putting out there? That's very much part of astrology's divination. So this is just an example of how you can use literature or tarot or astrology and allow your mind to bend while still having some materials to work with, so it keeps you in the ballpark. So we're not going crazy. Okay. So just a couple chart examples. And so there was a lady who came to me, and it was a really sad circumstance, but she had lost her son some years prior. And, we talked about it, and you can see on the footnotes of the chart, the writer Raymond Carver, I don't know if any of you remember him. He passed away, I think, in the 80s, but his story, A Small Good Thing, came to me. And I was like, why is this story coming to me? So it's actually a story about a child, tragically, who gets hit by a car. But the story really is about the parents and their relationship. So I was like, well, what's going on? So in astrology, the seventh house, while being the marriage partner or partners in general, is also the astrologer. So if you take the ruler of Gemini, and where is that in the chart? It's in the fifth house of children, and Gemini is the sign of writing. So I was like, well, this totally makes sense. And it's an image of a writer and a story that's coming to mind. Now, I couldn't put it together in the moment, but I was able to move the session to talking about, hey, what's going on with your marriage? And, that would, if you look, Taurus is 29, or excuse me, on the seventh house cusp, Taurus 29, on the seventh house cusp, 29 Taurus. So her husband would probably be Venus. But, I'm kind of Gemini with Raymond Carver, the two of us twins there, I guess. And then, again, Mercury being in the fifth house. So that's so that type of thing. And then if you look at the second chart, some of Raymond Carver's synastry, bam, he comes right in. Mars and Sun on the seventh house of the astrologer, really powerful. And again, Mercury being the sign of writing. So it's in the context of astrology as divination, that type of astrology really requires us all to be there at the moment. I mean, I would really, it'd really be something for somebody to just put that together independently, to look through a chart, be able to predict the death, and then to have Raymond Carver come and then look at those significations. It really is quite predicated upon it being in the moment. So again, this concept of really the divine moment. And I've tried to keep in touch with her. I wasn't able to keep in touch, but I hope that was able to provide some healing. Interestingly, she came in 2019, so there was a lot of transiting activity to her second house, and she was thinking of selling a property, and I did recommend that she do that, and I hope she did, because I think that was a good time to do it pre-pandemic. So, and I think it would have helped her to release something too, physical, the materiality of it. Okay. Okay, there we go. So powering through, but needing to sit down. So this was a client, it was two women, they were kind of coming in, it was like a Thelma and Louise trip. They were both getting out of their respective towns. They to my knowledge, they didn't commit any crimes, if you've seen the movie. But sadly, they got here, and in the middle of the night, it was before the reading, one of the ladies, her glass got smashed in. And, you know, they were able to get to the reading with me the next day. It was delayed. But if you look at the chart, a lot of ninth house activity. Ninth house is the house of trips, and not short trips. I mean, they were driving in some distance. And interestingly, Aries is the sign of glass. So when these events happen, the way I approach it is, what symbolism might we read into it to try to make a change for the better? So I started to talk to this client, and I was, you know, to be quite frank, just getting tired listening to her, because she is extraordinary what she's accomplished in her life. I mean, she has all these academic degrees. She's an entrepreneur. She started multiple businesses. She's a therapist. She has multiple clients, I guess. She trains therapists. It just blows my mind. So she came into the studio, and she was sitting in the chair. And then at one point she was like, you know what, can I just sit down on the floor? And I was like, yes, please do. So I looked at her chart, and I saw on the 10th house, which is generally we consider career, or at least how one approaches the career. Maurice Fernandez, the great astrologer, he talks about this, that 10th house stuff and even midheaven can be how you approach your career. So I was like, you know what, this is what you're going to have to do, because you can't just keep burning it like this and things crash. I mean, you're really, I think for long term, all the stuff you're going for, you're going to really have to sit down, Taurus. And Taurus is intercepted in your chart. And a lot of you will probably know intercepted signs, they don't necessarily get the play that all the other signs do, because it has to do with a concept called right ascension, long and short ascension, that it takes certain signs longer and shorter to rise depending where you are on the earth. And you don't get too technical about that, but needless to say, Taurus is intercepted in the chart. So that's an embodiment of how she can imbibe the spirit of the chart in that moment. So it's like the crash of the glass, her incredible drive that she has to do all these things. But if she's really going to carry it off, she's going to have to sort of sit and administrate Taurus. And she was doing that in the studio. And, you know, so that again, you know, I don't know how that could happen without the concept of astrology's divination. I don't, you know, I mean, without her kind of acting out the sitting down in the studio. Let's see. Sorry, it's just sometimes trying. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I didn't want to, you know, I don't want to. I've been going about a half hour. I don't want to ramble on, but I think the message of this really is get divining. Okay, you know, I believe we're all diviners in a way. Of course, nobody has to accept that label, but we all have the ability to divine, and that's not just me saying that. There's some interesting claims around that, how we can all be diviners, even if we're not astrology experts. Marsilio Ficino, one of the progenitors of the Renaissance, said something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing, those who know least about these arts know them best. And it's interesting, there were some tests done in the 60s by a psychologist named Vernon Clark, and it was live astrology tests. And there were some positive hits, but it was involved with the participatory nature of the astrologers coming in. But the interesting thing is, in some of those trials, people who had just a few years experience in astrology did just as well as some of the very experienced people. And I think it was, I forget if it was Michel Gauquelin or Jeffrey Dean. Those are interesting characters in the history of astrology, but really talking about, well, if we're going to really test it, it has to not be with live astrologers. It has to be, all right, we're just testing it on its own, irrespective of us. There's actually another thing on TV. It was an astrologer, Jeffrey Armstrong, and it was a live test, and they actually switched some of the charts up. And it was with the skeptic Michael Shermer, and they actually had some positive hits there. So again, that's a really long conversation, but the point of that is, the live, inspired, joyous mumbo jumbo is, I think it's a really great thing. And it's something I think we can all get into the spirit of. And it's really necessary to have that kind of imagination and awe that there's a lot that we don't know, and that it's only through the not knowing that we can actually move into revelation and knowing. So there you go. So get divining. If any of you are interested, that's my website. Like I said, I do readings if any of this resonates with you. But yeah, that's what I wanted to do. So if anybody wants to just talk about this, if anybody has questions or anything else, go for it. Okay.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I love how you bring in your own like personal interests and knowledge in literature, into your ability to look at signs and interpret. I mean, I think that's a real gift.
Yeah.
And I'm sure your clients love it as well.